talking The Haunting of Molly Bannister, also known as the Bannister Dollhouse, and apparently also known as Slasher House 3. This one is directed by M.J. Dixon, who is a prolific low-budget B-movie horror maker, and we've reviewed a few films from him in the past here. So what's the story of this one? Well, it is a classic haunted doll / possession movie. So we have this household, the Bannister family, of which there is the mother, the father, and 3 daughters. Now, the youngest daughter seems to get this mysterious Christmas present. We don't know who it's from, and it is this doll, this kind of weird-looking, somewhat creepy doll. Now, ever since she gets this doll, she seems to be acting out a little bit weird. Soon after that, we learn that one of the daughters has actually been murdered. Now, the father is initially blamed for this, but as the movie goes on, we learn that there may well be some supernatural force involved here, and it's ever since this doll is here. So we do get the kind of the Annabelle style haunted doll kind of goings on here, along with maybe some other things. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So a very low budget movie. I do have to emphasise this because this will kind of form part of my opinion on this one. But let's talk about what works first of all. Okay, so for me, there is one, or maybe a couple of instances in this movie where I feel there are sequences that are very well filmed, especially for such a low budget production. And very effective in regards to scary sequences. I don't want to spoil, I don't want to kind of point them all out to you, but there's just maybe 2 or 3 instances where I thought in this movie that worked pretty well. Even if it's just a shot that is a few seconds long or a slightly kind of longer sequence, kind of a minute or so, there are a few sequences within this movie that I feel do represent some good filmmaking and some good scares. I actually quite like the character of kind of like the older daughter, or the one that isn't murdered ultimately at the beginning. I actually thought she did the best job in regards to the acting here, and I thought her character seemed the most kind of realistic. The actual doll itself, I thought is handled fairly well, because I don't make it overtly kind of, obviously scary. I've seen some horror movies and where this kind of, why would any child want to have this doll? It clearly looks like it's meant to be a haunted doll. Whilst this one is just subtle enough to kind of look a little menacing, but also just kind of mainstream enough where you can imagine a child actually having something like that. And again, I'll just kind of go back to, there are a couple of kind of sequences involved here where the doll is involved, where it's filmed fairly well. The movie wisely stays away from effects that it clearly can't afford. Sometimes I see films where the effects just look terrible, and it almost would have been better just to not have that and just do maybe sequences where there's just simply not special effects involved. And for the most part, I would say this movie does kind of at least stick to its lane, so to speak. It really only tries to do effects that it can genuinely afford. There are a couple of instances where the effects are a little ropey, but for the most part, I think it kind of does the best that it possibly can within this kind of movie's budget. The movie is actually quite well paced, I would say, and we do get a smattering of kind of goings on throughout the film. So what doesn't work? I've got to say, maybe outside of the kind of like the older daughter, or the surviving daughter, the acting from the rest of the cast, unfortunately, is somewhat lackluster, to be polite. And it doesn't help, I think, that this movie has clearly had some ADR pickups, which is the kind of where they have to re-record the dialogue, and it never really seems to work that well in low-budget films, unfortunately, because it always seems it makes the acting seem worse. But to be honest with you, the acting isn't fantastic, generally speaking, anyway. And I have to say, there are some cringeworthy moments in the movie where the film doesn't make sense. So to give you an early example, this is at the beginning of the movie, when the first daughter is murdered, it happens right at the beginning of the film, so it's not a spoiler. Our father comes into the house and finds a dead body, immediately followed by the police. And at that point, no one knows that this girl has been murdered. It's just like, who has called the police? How can they have got there in literally seconds after the father has found the body? And then there's actually a callback to that at the beginning of, the end of the movie, where the father does something. You're just thinking, Jesus Christ. this is like such a dumbass decision, both for what the character does and also the way it's written. But there's also a few other moments within the movie where you just feel like it just doesn't have any type of logical sense. Some of the decisions made by the mother character I feel are just ridiculous, especially when on one hand she's kind of, for example, in complete denial about it, but on the other hand seems to, 2 seconds before, seems to absolutely understand that there's something supernatural kind of going on, but then denies it when someone else says something. Again, it's just very, very choppy writing, unfortunately. And you get the impression a lot of these kind of like these lower budget movies, they are shot really kind of quickly, and the quality suffers from that. Now, I don't know if that is the case with this movie, but I have spoke to British low budget filmmakers, and they get shot over a weekend. So I know that this happened, and I get the impression this is at least maybe what's happened with this particular movie. Maybe not quite that short, but you get what I'm saying here. The attention to detail simply isn't there. I feel just the kind of the low budgetness of this movie as well will kind of put some people off. Combine that with the kind of the sometimes poor acting and really mundane kind of camera work here. So overall, this movie does have a few moments of very, very sharp filmmaking and actually quite scary moments, but it's not enough to save the movie as a whole. I don't think this is a terrible film, and I actually have to say those moments for me did bolster the movie up to probably another mark, if I'm honest. So I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10, but without those few decent moments I would have said a 4. But I'll give this a 5 out of 10 because I do feel that it is at least entertaining for those reasons. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.